You want them to start with you and stay with you until they no longer travel, can no longer travel.
What I do is inconsequential. Why I do what I do is I get to shorten people's journeys every day. What I love about our hospitality industry is that it's our mission to make people feel cared for while on their journeys. Together, we'll explore what hospitality means in the built environment, in business, and in our daily lives. I'm Dan Ryan, and this is Defining Hospitality. This podcast is sponsored by Berman Falk Hospitality Group, a design-driven furniture manufacturer who specializes in custom case goods and seating for hotel guest rooms. Today's guest is a multi-time VP in the hospitality industry. He's someone whose expertise spans brand strategy, competitive intelligence, operations planning, and analytics. He's served brands like Promise, Marriott, and IHG. He's currently the head of analytics at STR, and he's also the co-host of Tell Me More, a hospitality data podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Isaac Collazo. Welcome, Isaac.
Hey, thank you, Dan. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, I'm so glad to have you on. And I just want everyone to know, I don't think we met at the lodging conference, but I've seen you up on stage speaking, and usually it's like a really quick, boiled down, I don't know what the format is, but it's like 30 seconds go, but you really make the data come alive. And then we were just at Alice in Los Angeles, and I was with Adrienne Scribner. And so I'm going to give her a shout out because I was going to go have lunch with her in a corner. And then she's like, no, let's mingle because that's why we're all here. And there were half the amount of people that were normally supposed to be there because of the big storm back east. So we sat down at your table, and then I was like, wait, you look really familiar. And then I just remembered how you make data come alive in such a way. And I know we talked about it and I got excited and I was like, oh my God, I'd love to have you on my podcast, because I think a lot of the people who listen here, from architects to designers, developers, managers, owners, I think that they would just love to hear how the data that you make come alive affects their lives. And then you said, oh, I have a podcast too. So it was just like, oh, good. We got two talking heads that we'll get them, we'll get us in the same room and we'll go. So I want to just say thank you. And it's so great to meet you. And a shout out to Adrienne for making me sit there. That was awesome. And she's going to be on in a couple of weeks as well. So
yeah, it was great. It was fun. Yeah, it was a very different Alice. Winter storm, Fern really just took a lot of people out because they couldn't get on a plane because so many planes were canceled to so many flights. So, but it was still a good Alice. So I enjoyed it.
Yeah,
most important thing.
It was great, and I had really good Korean barbecue in the food truck right there. So that was my.
I don't remember what I'd like. Whatever I had, I liked as well, because I did ask you what you were eating, but I don't remember what I ate anymore. But yeah, it was.
It was great. We were so enraptured with our conversations with each other.
Yes,
the two talking heads.
But shout out to Jeff Higley, who puts together the Alice conference, and the food truck idea was genius.
Yes,
I told him that whenever 2, 3, 4 years ago, whenever we first started, that is great. What a great idea.
Well, and it's also because you're in these conference rooms and ballrooms, and it's nice to just go outside to the food truck and get fresh air and LA sun. It was awesome. And actually, that's a type of hospitality, right? Putting on these conferences and everything else. And what does hospitality mean to you?
For me, it's people serving people. And it goes right back to those 3 words. I mean, that's what hospitality is, either be it a restaurant, be it a hotel, people taking care of you. And many times, you don't know what state of mind either the server or the recipient is. But again, it's just people just being people and just taking care of each other. And I think that's the greatest thing about hospitality. So I love this business. Been in it for 30 something years. I don't remember, but it's just a great business to be in. It's just, it's life, right? It's what happens.
It is. And I am amazed though, because really your ability to analyze data and take numbers and make them come alive and tell a story, right? You can apply that anywhere, right? Yeah. So, and I don't know where you started earlier in your career, but how did you find your way? I assume you did it for many different platforms, but how did you find your way into hospitality, and what kept you in hospitality?
It was just a fluke, right? So just like every other person trying to pay car insurance, right? It goes back to such very basic things. I grew up in a very moderate household, so didn't have much money. So when I'm on my own, started working actually very young. I started at young in terms of a professional career. I was with a marketing firm when I was, I think, a freshman or sophomore in college. So most people don't start professionally in the freshman or sophomore year, right? And so these two individuals who started their own firm in San Antonio began this marketing firm called Metro Consultants. And I was employee number one. They took me under their wing and started really teaching me, threw me into the fire and said, this is how it is to service a client. This is, how to work with the client, how to create the ideas, and it was the best education ever. And again, I was still in college. And so really my background was marketing. So, and it's storytelling. It goes right back to that. And the real connection between data storytelling and just in my career is radio, TV, film. I was a radio, TV, film major in college. And so
Oh,
I was going to be a film producer. So I can edit. So I can edit this if you want me to edit. I could do film edits. I could do audio edits. I could take out my uhs.
I
So
just
I
need
eliminate
Alex. I need Alex, our producer, to know you feel no threat here. Alex, you're good. You're good.
But I learned all that. I actually have an associate's degree in a radio, TV, film, and then I have a bachelor's degree. And then I also did a business. I double majored in when I got to the big university, and then I went on and got my MBA when I really started getting into the
Got
data
it.
side. But going back to your question, hospitality, it just happened because I was working with these folks. Then I went on to work for a marketing with a big bank in San Antonio, which still exists. If you watch the Spurs and you see Frostbank Center, I was at Frost Bank. And the guy who is now president and CEO or chairman, he was the head of marketing at the time. So I worked for him. And then this lady who sat next to me knew someone at La Quinta Inns. At the time, La Quinta Inns was still being run. The CEO was still Sam Barshop. He had started the company, and it was listed on New York Stock Exchange, based in San Antonio. And so she goes, "There's this really cool job I think you'd be great for." I don't know why she did that, but she did. And sure enough, I ended up at La Quinta. And the selling point, this is the greatest selling point, all of us had a desktop computer.
Oh, so that now you're dating yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and then I started, so I was in marketing there, did a lot of analysis, who actually did all the content and was in charge of all the production
Oh,
from
wow.
TV to print to billboards. And one day I did an analysis on our billboard spend. And the CMO, John Kagi at the time, came into my office or into my, it was an office, but it was a cube. It's one of those things. You remember those days?
But it had a desktop computer on
Yeah,
it.
it had a desktop. And he goes, "You did this?" And I'm thinking, I'm all of 26, 27-ish, thinking, "Hey, I'm in trouble. What did I do wrong?" Right? And he goes, "This is fabulous." And I said, "Really?" He goes, "You have real quantitative abilities." And I do. I thought I'm just a design, creative kind of guy. And that's how I got into data. Literally,
Okay.
that is how I got into data. Started going into the research side, the qualitative side, started doing all the qualitative analysis, guest satisfaction for La Quinta Inns. And then we started really analyzing reservation data. And that was the first time that, again, it was very difficult to use data in those days because a lot of it was mainframe. But because we all had desktops, there was this cool new program called Microsoft Access. And you could link tables, you could join tables. So this relational database, and that is how I truly began into the data world and have been there ever since.
Wow. Okay, cool. And I think a good way to tee this part of the conversation up is, okay, so most of our listeners are designing, building, owning, operating hotels, right? But they're really deploying the CapEx, making these beautiful, wonderful, memorable experiences, right? But oftentimes what I find is we lose sight of the fact that these are real assets, right? Like a billboard is a type of real asset that generates a yield and a return, all the way to oil refineries. So multifamily, like you have everything all in there, and hospitality is one of the segments. What one of Well, I've heard you speak many times over the years, but specifically something that struck me back in October, I think it was October at the lodging conference, you said that it was the Q3 or Q4 was the first quarter in a non-recessionary environment where ADR dropped. So we're not in a recession.
Right.
Average daily rate dropped, and that really struck me. I don't really know what that meant, but it seemed shocking to me. And
Yeah.
okay, so I want you to talk to that one. Like, why
Yeah.
should that be shocking? And what did you learn from that? And even with hindsight, what do you learn? And then how does that tie into your latest podcast, which everyone should give a listen to, where the title of the pod was "Demand is Turning a Corner." So how do you, what did it mean? And how does that latest podcast, how do you
Great.
tie that together and tell us a story about that?
Yeah, we'll talk about yes. Beginning in the second quarter last year, we started a trend in this industry again that we had not seen in a non-recessionary period. Now, many of you listening could probably argue, no, the economy is really weak. Well, that's a sentiment, but when you look at the data, GDP, the economy was actually pretty solid last year and is expected to be solid. So again, we're looking at all the government figures and the economy is measured by data. And so no, the US was not in a recession in 2025, nor is it in a recession in 2026 as of yet.
Okay, let me just ask one question, jokingly, not jokingly.
Okay.
With the whole Doge initiative, they got
Yeah.
rid of a lot of the economists and the reporting.
Right.
So are you trusting the government information, or are you looking at like third party, other metadata and other analytics? Like, how do you make that judgment? And is there, like, are you seeing a reduced quality in quantitative information coming from the government?
No, we're not really seeing a reduce. It's mostly a timeliness. We've seen some reduction, not reduction, but yeah, not as timely as before. But it's still the same data. And again, we're trending it. We're looking at it multiple ways. We also use tourism economics, or excuse me, Oxford economics, which is tourism is a part of Oxford, but Oxford, and so we rely on them as well. We rely on with a lot of other economists that we follow, and so we all feel that the data is, it's still usable and it's correct.
Mm.
And again, you can also tell, again, I'm a great believer of observation. And yes, there are sectors of our economy that are being impacted, lower income households, and even some middle income households. But if you look at everything else, again, overall, the economy is still humming. You go to a restaurant, it's still pretty busy. You go to a city like Nashville, where I find myself today, it's still people are traveling. So that's why we know it's not a true recession. A recession, when I remember in 2008, when there was a real recession, you could see it in my neighborhood.
Mm.
You were living in Atlanta. I have two homes there, but my Atlanta home and then my home in Nashville. But in my neighborhood, you could feel it because everyone in my neighborhood is a corporate gypsy, as I like to say. We've all lived everywhere. We move, we work for all these big companies. And you could see the impact where people were losing their jobs, homes going on the market, people, new cars were not as prevalent anymore.
Grass is getting taller.
Yeah.
Mm.
So that's how you can see it. So again, that's why the economy is not in a recession at the moment. But when I said lodging, and and lodging, by the way, is probably the most difficult presentation I do because that 3-minute data speed thing takes a lot of work. It takes more
Yeah.
work than us talking because I had 3 minutes and I've got to get as much as I can in those 3 minutes.
Well, you struck me, like it worked, and here we are, right?
Yeah.
That was, you set the hook, and here we are. So all that
I
work pays off.
I don't get nervous speaking in front of people. I
Mm.
don't. I've spoken in front of 9,000 people before, and that doesn't make me nervous. Lodging makes me nervous because
Mm.
you just got to be on point, and so I have a script. I literally write my script and practice and practice and practice so that I know it's 3 minutes long. So that was difficult. But there, I said again that we hadn't seen this, and we hadn't. Normally, when RevPAR goes negative, it is linked. You can see the direct connection to the economy. And this time we're going opposite directions. The economy was still growing, but the industry was not. And that was different. And it was very different. Some of it has to do with sectors of the economy because we're just measuring total TDP. There is no, a real economic measure that I can use for different household levels of income and things,
Mhm.
right? Especially on a month-to-month basis.
And just so everyone knows, the true term of a recession is negative GDP growth 2 quarters in a row. And sometimes data gets revised and you
Right.
don't know you're in a recession until
Right.
after, but we're far enough from Q2 of last year that recession didn't happen.
Yeah, it didn't happen. And again, and there were other points that, again, we still had employment growing. There were points of
Mm.
saying, no, you can't be in a recession and growing. And we were doing pretty well on the employment front. So that's what I talked about and said, and we did have 3/4 negative RevPAR. Again, that's very rare. We saw ADR also come down below the rate of inflation. So it was just a very weird environment, and even demand was negative.
And
So
not just rare. One of those, whether it was RevPAR or ADR, I don't remember because I could have gotten it wrong because I'm a idiot. But it was the first time that that had ever happened since tracking all of the data.
yeah, it was just very yes, we've
Hmm.
never seen this. Very odd. It was odd for us. So, what's different now? When I was doing the January analysis, so December came in, December RevPAR was still down. It was down like 0.1%, like very little down. I remember, I have that number correct. But then January was up 0.5. That I do know
Oh,
is right. And I realized, and again, sometimes you're looking at data, and again, I'm looking at this weekly, daily. I'm looking at data, but sometimes you don't see something until you just see it, and you go, "Whoa, that's
hmm.
different." And so when I saw the December and January data together, I said, "Wait a minute, this is the beginning of the trend." Because before that, if you're looking at this at a time series, everything was going down, especially in the fourth quarter, and then this December starts this, and then you get January that's up, positive. And then at the same time, I'm working with all the February data, and I noticed, wait a minute, this is continuing. We now have 3 months where the demand side as well as the RevPAR side are trending upward, and
Hmm.
that's why we changed the title or have the title on our latest podcast about that demand trend. That this is different. This is did we turn the corner, right? And again, it's hard to say that 3 months is a trend, so I do always caution, but it sure does look like a trend that something's changed. I even correlate. I also overlaid TSA screening data with demand. And if you look at it in the time series, especially in the summer and toward the end of the year, there's a gap
Hmm.
where TSA is growing, so people are traveling, but hotel demand is declining. And then comes December, November, December, and they're starting to realign. And we're like, wow, that's different again. So
Huh.
that's why we're right now in this no man's land because we have to wait a few more weeks, months before we can actually say, hey, we're out of this, whatever we were in. But it sure is more encouraging. And just for as a side note, February RevPAR, based on our preliminary data, probably increased 4.3%.
That's
That will be
huge.
the largest RevPAR gain since January of 2023.
Really?
Yeah.
So, okay. So now,
Hey,
from me reading the Wall Street Journal, listening to Bloomberg Radio and all this, I keep hearing and reading about this K-shaped recovery, right? And you talked about that a little bit earlier in this conversation where, okay, so you're you're not everyone is feeling the, we're not in a recession, but not everyone is feeling hunky dory, right? So I think you've said like the lower income tiers are struggling and not feeling that great. In the hotel world or hospitality world, there's so many different segments, but there's luxury, upper upscale, upscale, upper mid-scale, and economy. When you see that 4.3%, is that more on the upper upscale or lower? Like, how does that segment come? And
yeah.
does that mean if it's driven on the upper tiers, are they seeing 10% or 8% and while the other ones are dragging?
Yeah, that's a great question. And let me just clarify. I said January, it's the highest since January 2023. No, it's January 2025. So
Oh, okay.
I knew that. And when it came out, I knew it was wrong, but I just want to clarify
Okay.
that.
But a 4.3% growth in anything is
Yeah.
a lot, right?
Yeah. It's coming. It was pretty widespread. What I saw in the data, and I'm blanking out right now in terms of seeing my charts in my head, but we saw demand growth across all the chain scales.
Really?
And so that's different. And then it has to be because the only way we can get that kind of growth is it has to be more widespread. So even to luxury, we've been talking about the K-shaped economy and and even bifurcation in the hotel industry. You got to remember, luxury is such a small segment
Yeah.
of the biggest segments are upper mid scale. Just think about Holiday Inn Express, Hampton Inn. You see them everywhere. So that's the bulk of our industry. And then you also have upscale Courtyard, Hilton Garden Inns are in. That's another big segment. The luxury is really, really small.
So most of the clients that I have on the design side and project management side and ownership side, they kind of play in that luxury and lifestyle realm, which is okay. Luxury is the small part, which is parabolic right now, right? But that lifestyle, I don't really know where that fits in because that goes everything from independence to upscale, and even sometimes upper mid scale. But one of the things I heard about a year ago was that while that luxury and lifestyle segment, I don't know exactly how to break it down by the standard segments, but that luxury and lifestyle segment has 10% of the total rooms that are available. I heard this from some quarterly call I was listening to, and they have 10% of the rooms, but they're contributing more than 20% of the earnings to all the big brands. So IHG, Hilton, Marriott, Accor, those are all the big ones. I don't mean to leave anybody out, but they're contributing outsized earnings to all the big brands. And what I've seen from a guest experience perspective is a bifurcation of luxury and lifestyle from the big brands. And like IHG has put Kimpton and Regent and Vignette and Six Senses under one umbrella. Hilton has put Graduate and Waldorf and, oh my God, I'm going to forget them all. Marriott has put all their luxury from Ritz-Carlton to JW under another umbrella. Accor has all their, boutique and luxury under, but they're all kind of separating out how people think about the brand from a guest experience perspective. Many of them are moving teams into New York City to deal with, like, just have the freshest, most creative new ideas coming through. And this is all anecdotal story and experience that I'm sharing. But how do you tie that growth, or when I share that with you, what does that make you think? Like, am I just off base in that, or
no, I don't think you're off
is there
base.
truth to that? And what's your opinion?
Not only you're off base, and again, I think lifestyle brands have been growing for some time, and for all of us that have been in the industry in a long time, it's a natural evolution of the industry, right? There was a time in our industry where a business traveler wanted the assurance that everything was going to be exactly the same. And by being exactly the same, i.e. vanilla, it was a quality cue that it was exactly the same. So you knew what you were going to get, you knew where you were at, etc. And that was what was expected back in the 80s and 90s. And that's what people felt was necessary. And then we started seeing that break with brands like Kimpton, the original Kimpton brand, coming out and doing just something very different.
Yeah.
You remember talking to some people and some research I was doing about Kimpton versus the normal brands, Hilton, Marriott's, etc. And what struck me then at that time was that the individuals I was talking to were exactly the same psychographically.
Yeah.
What they wanted was something different. They were road warriors. So they were tired of the beige walls. I look around my office, which is kind of beige and gray, and they wanted something different. So lifestyle hotels is what emerged, and Kimpton was kind of on that forefront to start pushing that design element with your world and really making it fun. Where you walk into the room and you're like, wow, this is really cool. And I go back to, like, when you watch The Gilded Age or you watch period pieces, hotels were always the grandeur of a hotel, right? They always were inspiring, and you got in awe. You walk in and you go, oh my God, this is beautiful. This is different. And maybe as an industry, we lost that because we went cookie cutter and for quality and everything's exactly the same. You lost the individuality of it and you lost the awe. Lifestyle hotels come in, and I think it's bringing that back. And I think that's why I think people are attracted to that, because you want to say, God, I'm at this really cool hotel. And now in the era of Instagrams, you want to take a picture, and show your friends where you're at. So
what's interesting is that wanting everything the same, that was my dad, right? He wanted to know that iron was in the same location at every Marriott Courtyard he stayed at, and he was a road warrior. Whereas, and there's this generational rebellion that just has happened since people were around, right? Your parents do it one way, you want to do it different. Your parents think about the world one way, you want to think about it different. And that's just the nature of the beast. And it is interesting to see how Kimpton, because that's actually how I got my start in the industry when I started my first business. Kimpton was like my first client. And I'm forever grateful for that, living in San Francisco at the time. It was very exciting.
Yeah.
And then W came around, and that was super exciting. But there was like this little explosion that happened in that era. And I don't know, I just feel like now Marriott is acquiring and Hilton is acquiring a lot of these luxury and lifestyle and also beefing up their luxury and lifestyle. But what's interesting on that generational rebellion, talking to someone at Marriott a couple of weeks ago, we were talking in front of a bunch of multifamily developers, and Marriott has 40 some odd brands, right? But what's interesting is they're not just creating a language for each brand. They're also, you said psychographic, they're also trying to figure out a way how to get that moxie young 26-year-old throughout their life to go up into the Waldorfs or the Ritz-Carltons. And they use Bonvoy is a huge part of that as a moat. But that isn't the only story. There's so much other work and design and creativity and branding that has to keep that stickiness and keep them aligned. What are you seeing as far as the brands and in relation to that generational rebellion and how they're trying to keep people kind of locked in?
Yeah, I think it is through the loyalty programs. Always has been. We've always been trying that from every company I've ever worked with. Is you want some kind of stickiness, right? But and you want them to continue to progress in their career or their life with you, right? That's the name of the game. You want them to start with you and stay with you until they no longer travel, can no longer travel. And so I think that will continue.
Well, I found that out with my dad. He had a bajillion Marriott miles, and then when he passed away, I found out that those were not transferable at death.
Well, you should have transferred them to you before.
I know. I didn't think about that. Yeah.
I think it's really interesting. I think the lifestyle, the change in hotels mimics the change in mostly males, not females. But if you remember, your dad probably dressed very differently than you are dressed today.
Yeah.
And his lifestyle is very different than yours.
A lot more vodka.
Really?
And cigarettes. Yeah.
No, and I'm a bourbon guy, so
Okay.
not. But again, what was interesting about is that it was a massive change happening into the way males are dressing, acting, if you remember metrosexuals, all that kind of idea where you didn't have to be, again, males were very cookie cutter, especially if you were in the corporate world. You wore the white shirt with the blue pants and the blue jacket, right? It was very just cookie cutter as you can be. Everyone was exactly alike. So individualities, which I think's happened in the business world. Again, women have always been more individualistic than males were at the time, especially even that era. But now I think that's what started the whole design phase. And again, same thing with going back to the Bonvoy stuff or any kind of reward program, it is trying to acknowledge that we know you're different and you have different needs. So here's a hotel that meets your specific needs or what you want. If you want a hotel that caters to fitness, we have that for you because we know that's important to you. So this gym is not going to be a bay. It's going to be multiple bays where you have, techno gym equipment, stuff that you want versus someone else, another brand. No, they're there for the bar. They want to give me a good bar. And so I think it's just trying to find that. Yes, there's probably way too many brands right now, but the idea is like a shirt. There's going to be lots of shirts, and not everyone wants the shirt that I'm wearing or the one you're wearing. They want this other one.
So also at Alice, there was an interesting conversation with Ryan Diggins. He helped develop the Ramble Hotel in Denver. I mean, he developed it, not helped. He just did another project called, oh my God, I forget the name, in Savannah. But really, they lead with the F&B and really the B. Hey, everybody. We've been doing this podcast for over 3 years now. And one of the themes that consistently comes up is sustainability. And I'm just really proud to announce that our sponsor, Berman Falk Hospitality Group, is the first within our hospitality industry to switch to sustainable and recyclable packaging, eliminating the use of styrofoam. Please check out their impact page in the show notes for more info. Actually, walk me through this one too, because I've also heard that one of the reasons why the big brands went after the Kimptons and the Graduates and all this was not only, okay, you can build a brand or you can acquire a brand, right?
Right.
But also independent hotels historically have outperformed for the investors, right? Because more money is dropping to the bottom line because they're not paying that 4 to whatever percent VIG on being a part of that brand and the brand network. Is that still holding up? But on the flip side of that coin, it's harder to get financing. It might be harder to attract other kinds of capital. What are you seeing
That's
there?
that's that's difficult to say in generalities. Obviously, independent brands that are luxury or that are just that are more unique, yes, they can have a better. They can not necessarily. It's not a given, right? Most independent brands, if you really look at the most, especially what I look at in my world, they're old, they're very large, and they've passed their useful life essentially. Most
Mhm.
of the stock in that is just older hotels who've gone through their life cycle. But then you have those gems, and those are the ones the true independents that continue to just be and they're gems, right? They're unique hotels. And so they probably do, but by being unique, they also have different cost structures and things. So it just really depends because it just depends on their service levels because that's going to impact your GOP and your EBITDA
Mm.
is what are you providing? And I think what Kimpton did well back in the day was recognizing, going back to your F&B comments, is they realized that hoteliers were great at running hotels, but not great at running restaurants.
Yeah.
Yeah. What if we just have a restaurant division and we hire people who know what they're doing in this space? That way we can create a standalone restaurant that just happens to be in the same building as the hotel. And I think that was really genius at the time, because no one in the design spaces that were not to take care of guests per se, but it was a restaurant that needed to stand on its own 2 feet and deliver revenues and profitability versus just to be a space within a
Mm. And
hotel.
they did do that really well because they also that engaged those hotels with the local community. Also at Alice, I saw Sam, and I can't remember his last name, from Think Food Group with Jose Andres, and he was talking about the F&B experiences that they're doing in hotels. He was talking about these 6 pillars. I was like, I thought like you want 2 or 3 pillars, but no, he explained the 6 pillars of theirs are from I'm going to mess it up. The entrance lobby, the restaurant inside, the food court, the room service, the rooftop bar, the restaurant somewhere else. And a lot of people, if you do the F&B correctly, from what I've been hearing, is it can actually drive ADR and it can drive performance in the hotel, but it requires a whole different focus, set of values, and commitment. But what's interesting is the hotels that really lean into the F&B, it doesn't affect it. Sometimes F&B is a drag on valuation. And it's a hard way to attract capital because the traditional way of looking at things is through rooms revenue. Explain that to everyone.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's been the metric, and we probably were the forefront on getting that metric instilled. So yeah, you remember when we started, and STR started in about 87, it was very difficult to benchmark a hotel to your performance. And that's when we started getting the data and created the RevPAR metric and then RGI and everything we know as today. But it still is only looking at rooms revenue. Most of the majority of our data set is still that rooms revenue piece. But we do know that, again, and we do have a P&L within STR. We do also track P&L, just harder data to get to. People are not as
Oh,
willing
because
to
it's
give
private. Yeah.
Yeah, they don't want to give us that data.
But don't you, I didn't realize, so STR came up with the RevPAR metric?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
I don't know. We came up. Well, we certainly popularized it. I've got to find out. But
Okay.
we definitely were on the forefront in terms of the benchmarking of it. Maybe RevPAR was in the vernacular, but there was no way to benchmark against anyone else.
Mm.
So
Well,
I'm going to find out if
yeah, let
we
us know
were.
about that. That would be cool. It would be
Yeah.
great to claim it. I mean,
Yeah.
that's like what was that one? It's like, from Austin Powers. He's like, I invented the question mark,
Yeah. I need to find out. I have to ask. So STR was started by a guy named Randy Smith, and so who was seeded a little bit by Holiday Inn Corporation at the time. So he had been with Levital and Horowitz, the a big I don't know, a big 8, big 10, whatever they called those accounting firms back then before it imploded.
Yeah, now it's like the big 4 or 3,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I got to find out if that's an interesting one. But I think again, talking about what you're saying, and Jose Andres is really interesting because we're seeing it happen in this market. They just took over all the food outlets at the W Nashville. They're putting
Oh,
3 concepts in that hotel,
and
and
that
one
hotel was already crushing it.
yeah, and now they have 3 concepts. One is on the Mediterranean. I don't know how you say it. The other one is going to be Bar Mars. I know that one because I'm actually eating with the one in Chicago. And then they're doing something else, another name that
Well,
I
they're
don't
probably
know.
doing 6, right? Because they're probably going to do the room service as well,
Yeah,
right?
I think they're good. Yeah.
But
So it's an amazing. And that becomes a draw for that hotel. That hotel was doing well. That's going to be a big draw, especially if you're a Jose Andres fan. And I think it's just important. And I think it is important that the F&B is it's another element to the grandeur of past times. I go back to when you went to a hotel back in the day, it was most hotels served before the road warrior served the wealthy, right? And so they always had great dining facilities and things. And that was an experience. And I think we kind of lost that. We lost the experiential piece that people want, especially post COVID now. Everyone wants experiences. And again, everyone wants to say, wants to tell someone, you always want to tell a story. It's like, I saw this great hotel and the food, the bar was incredible.
okay, and I understand that hotels are hotels and they're not billboards, right? So
Right.
they do deserve their own analytics and metrics.
Sure.
But in the case of those independent hotels, or even not independent, but like luxury and lifestyle that really invest in the food and beverage experience, do you think that RevPAR, the overweight of that RevPAR analytic, do you do you
You
think that
think
does
that
a disservice and it almost disincentivizes a lot of hotels to invest more heavily in that?
no, I don't think so. I think it's it becomes part of the identity of that hotel and is also a driver of that revenue stream for that hotel.
Mm.
So I think it actually helps it a lot. If you are a hotel that has something very unique, I do believe that gives you a premium in those room rates and will also be a premium for your demand versus the marketplace.
Mm.
Because essentially the entire package is an experience now. It's just not a room. So if you go in as a customer that you're seeking, hey, I'm going to go to Nashville. I'm going to go on Broadway, but I also don't want to just be, on Broadway, your pizzas and burgers, whatever, at a Broadway bar. I want something nicer, and I do want to do a spa. I want to do all this. That's where that all comes in. It's holistic. I think that's the difference. It's more of a holistic view of that asset versus just a singular view, and
It
that's what
is,
we're.
but I from just things that I've heard where they do have the successful F&B, I think that if it's like, for instance, at the Ramble, that you have to walk through the bar to check in, and it's it's Death and Co. It's a great bar experience, but
Been there.
their rates were or are scratching at the Four Seasons, which is like right down the street, and it's because of that bar experience. But I feel like if you were to look at the valuation of that hotel versus the Four Seasons is worth more because, I guess it's because they're not like factoring in the F&B experiences heavily at the Ramble.
It could be. Again, it really depends. I've been to I forgot that was the name of the hotel. I've been there. I was just there at Death and Co. in November. So I was like, God, I've just been there.
Yeah.
And so, but I love that bar. It is a cool bar. And so, but it just depends. I think that's education. And you have to, again, if you're doing the valuation, you have to understand the asset. I think
Uh,
that's just hey, what is the driver of this asset? And sometimes we just get stuck in our old ways, and including us data people, and we just, maybe they just didn't see the holistic picture of how important Deathco is in that bar to the hotel
yeah.
experience. And
I,
so
I I don't know if they were looking to have a
I
capital event or whatever, but it just seems to me like it should be equally weighted because I've talked to other general managers and they say if I want to make my hotel more profitable, I get rid of the F&B, and that's kind of like the old school way of thinking. But and maybe it's true. The market is the market, right? It knows things that we all don't know.
It just depends, as an asset owner, it just really depends
Mm.
because the margins, depending on that food service, the margin on that food service can be considerable, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, every drink can be a lot more, but you have to make sure that it's delivering. Otherwise, yeah, it could also be a drain on profitability.
But it could also be contribute 30 to 50% in many cases to the revenue of the property. And I assume that that's equally, it drops down to the profitability as well.
And the hard part with the restaurants, as we all know, is just the type of service level. Yeah, if you're gonna do an 11 Madison Park type menu every night, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of cost involved there, right?
Yeah.
Because that is incredible, but there's a tremendous amount of cost, and you have to have, number of covers you're gonna need. It has to be full all the time, or it's gonna be difficult to pin that one.
Yeah.
But if you do something a little different that is still has a service level that is appropriate for the type of property, but you can keep all those costs at bay, and just normal costs, not the extraordinary costs. I would think it's very profitable. Again, right now, different times, we got food cost rising, we have labor cost rising, so there are so many factors.
Great. And I want to get into
Yeah.
those are different times. I want to get into the time we're in now, because okay, financial crisis.
Yep.
There was so much new inventory coming on board up until 2008. And then I think what happened with COVID, one of the reasons why we were able to recover so quickly after COVID was because there just wasn't a ton of new inventory built, right? Because everyone was still stung from the financial crisis. Yes? Does that make sense?
No, in fact, I'm looking at it right now. Right, the year after, I decided to pull up data because I'm trying to.
Right.
Yeah, we were running about in December. In the full year ending 2019, supply was up 1.8, and then in 22 it was up 1.7. So some of that was so it was not much of a change, because some properties got postponed, but everything that already was.
But if you go back to 2005-6, there was a ton of new inventory coming on, right?
Well, it was a 2%. It was actually, no, in 2005, we were, let's say 2007, 1.2, 2008, 2.3.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, it was, again, but you're also a smaller base. It's just different. It's just different.
Well, this is why, this is why I love having you on, because I hear all these narratives, and then the data counteracts the narratives that we often hear. Okay. So you said something earlier about in the rise of the luxury and lifestyle and the repositioning of older hotels into the lifestyle and zhuzhing them up a bit. But there are many older hotels that are long in the tooth that really need some TLC.
Right.
And one of the things that I've noticed over my career is that, like the stock market, if you look at it over 50 years, it goes up and to the right. Right? When it comes down, usually that ties into a credit cycle, right? Where everything's tightening up. Where do you, I'm talking to some friends in the multifamily space, and they're saying we're either approaching the bottom, at the bottom, or just coming out of this current credit cycle. What are you seeing out there?
Wow, that's a great question. I don't know if I can do anything in general. I think it just depends, right? So if you're in downtown Nashville, multifamily, there you can get a deal right now. And again, a deal is all relative, because for some people, a deal at $2,000 is not a deal, right? It's $2,000 a month for an apartment, and for a small apartment. But we're seeing a glut here. Other markets don't have that. It's a little better. So we are, I think, from what I read on the national side, with my co-star colleagues of the apartments, that I think we've already reached the bottom, and that we are returning. I think that's what I read. I hope I got that right for my co-star colleagues who are watching this or listening. But I think it is turning the corner, but it just depends on them. Like everything else, it depends on the market. Because like this market is just seeing lots of building, but this is also a market that is truly coming of age and developing. So it's probably the right play. You just have to wait a little bit to get that higher occupancy numbers from the multifamily side.
Great. Well, where I'm trying to go with this is, I've been talking about this a lot because I just find, as far as renovations, repositioning, hotel trading, it's been stuck. And I think what I'm saying is there's this lake of hotel transactions and capital expenditures that is held back by a dam of high interest rates, tariff uncertainty, high labor costs, high construction costs, all of these things. But at some point, because I know you being a road warrior, me being a road, I'm going some places, there's nowhere available, and I'm staying somewhere for like $500, $600 a night, and it's a piece of garbage.
Right.
And at some point, it needs to freshen up. It's getting long in the tooth. Where do you see that dam chipping away in the short term?
I don't see that in the short term, right? And especially now we have such greater uncertainty that just occurred 6 days ago, 7 days ago. So I don't see it. But going back, just because but individuals, I think, as you said, at some point you have to reinvest, assuming you can do so, because if not, you will lose the market. So if you get tired, if you've loved this hotel and now you're just like, God, not even the iron it's burning my clothes because it's so scorched, or the bed sucks, you're just not going to stay there. So
Yeah.
then it becomes a death spiral, right? Because if you're not going to invest money, then that product, then you're going to lose your demand, and then you're in the worst possible. Now you have, you need the capex, but you don't have even the revenues coming in to support anything at this point. So I think that's a very precarious situation to be in. I mean, there's little things you can do always to get a property freshened up. And I understand it's very difficult, especially from the interest rate environment to capital. I mean, it's difficult, but you can't.
I also heard, and again, this could be a narrative that I heard that's incorrect, but I also heard that in COVID, a lot of the hotel owners that were branded properties were allowed to deplete their CapEx reserves.
Right.
And now, once that's happened and you've distributed and you're profitable, it's hard to kind of want to rebuild that. And the banks are being flexible on those covenants that were there before. And hotels require more CapEx than most other real assets or real. So like, what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I mean, we've got to go back to getting back to where we were and putting those reserves in place. You have to, because the product will deteriorate. There's just no doubt, right? We know, you're in that business at some point, and if it deteriorates to a point, then you lose the revenue stream. So then you sell the asset and someone else has put the money in, and maybe that's the owner's exit strategy. It's like, I'm going to milk this for all it's worth, then I'll sell it to someone who will put the money back in.
Yeah.
And maybe again, that's a strategy, right? So that is a true strategy.
But one of the other things I noticed is in 2019, this is just before COVID, everything was running really well. Everything was great. And I remember saying this, and this actually helped me pivot my business, but I felt, and I could be wrong here again, which is fine, but I felt that one of the decision points that I had in 2019 was we're 10 years into that 7-year cycle. So I don't know what's going on, and this is just wild. And then COVID happens in 2020, and I feel like I don't know if we skipped a cycle or something happened or when it's coming back, but I feel like the amount of money that flooded into hospitality and the war chests, because everyone thought that hospitality, no one's going to travel during COVID, like this is going to be easy acquisition targets. I heard that there was $1 trillion of dry capital waiting, or dry powder waiting to acquire, but because so much money flooded through PPP, interest rates going to zero, everything else, like it just, the capitalism didn't get to do its thing, and the capital didn't recycle. Do you notice that, or is that like is that just a narrative that is not backed up by data?
I don't know if it's backed up by data, so I don't know, because I don't know. I really don't. I could say I don't know. But again, what I do is observe, and there's still plenty of capital going into hotels, both in terms of refurbishment and new builds. And again, I may be very jaded because I live in Nashville part-time, but I also have my home in Atlanta. And I still see movement there and properties being built or renovated and changed. So and it just really depends. And then a lot of the owners I know, because being part of IHG for 20 years, I was also very associated with the owners association. And I just know these folks, and most of them are really hospitality people at heart, and they just take a lot of pride in their products and making sure that because they also see the competitive advantage of a good versus bad product. So I think it's getting there. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I just don't know. But what I see is that I still see lots of development, and I still see, and I'm watching the data. Yeah, it's less so. Yeah, again, I'll go back to if you look at the pipeline, you're seeing a smaller number of projects actually under construction. But you got to remember, a lot of those projects that are not under construction um, are more of your road warrior hotels, right? They're kind of, and so the people are holding on those at this point because it makes sense.
So
And
if you were an architecture or design firm or a project management firm, or a general contractor that specializes in developing hospitality, and you're trying to read the tea leaves and look at where we are in the cycle and seeing that dam and seeing that lake that's held back, where's a good place aside from just looking locally? Because a lot of these firms work on projects in North America and internationally. What's a good place to get better? There's 1,000 points of light. There's a whole mosaic of information. But for those people who are kind of thinking about, do I restructure? Do I let some people go? Do I start hiring again? Like, where do they go and look for that data? Or how can they kind of piece that story together in that little segment of the CapEx world in the hospitality world?
wow, that's a great question, Dan. I go back to everything begins in this industry with demand. So
Mm.
you have to watch the demand trends.
And going back to your podcast that just came
You're
out, you said demand turned a corner.
yeah,
Is that
and
just a
for
blip or we don't know?
we don't know yet.
Yeah.
So again, 2 to 3 months is not a real trend yet, but it
Mm.
sure does look like it's a trend, but we just don't know. But I think you go back to looking at that because that's going to be your decision point whether travel is going to see that growth that it saw uh, pre-COVID. And so I think that's going to be, and then that's also a good parameter. If we see more people traveling, that also indicates the economy is strengthening or something's changed in perceptions, real dollars, whatever, that something has truly changed.
Yeah.
When people start traveling again and staying in hotels, that normally is a very positive sign, economic sign. That would also probably indicate that would probably be very correlated with interest rates starting to come back down, things of that sort, inflation hopefully coming back down. So I mean, for me, that's how I look at the data. That's how I think about life and decision points. Because if people are out there, then yeah, things are starting to turn better, and that should be good for the capital markets as well.
It is interesting. You'll read the newspapers, you listen to the financial news, you watch the TV, and everyone has a guess on what the Fed is going to do, raise, lower. And I think that that's probably has the biggest effect on development. And it's just nobody knows. And past results don't predict the future. But I would just like if I were to look at the tea leaves, I would be like, okay, I think we're about to enter an easing cycle.
Of course we are, because the probabilities are higher that that's going to happen because interest rates have been high for so long.
Yeah.
So just from a probability standpoint, yes. And inflation has been coming down. And that's a big driver of interest rates, or at least for the Fed's decisions on interest rates, right? So assuming again, I just look at probabilities. If there's a higher probability that interest rates are going to come down than there are going up, right? That
Yeah.
just makes sense. I mean, that's not like super easy.
And that
term.
signals the start of a new credit cycle.
Right, exactly.
Okay, cool.
So, but also the other thing I would go back to is I kind of go back to when I was young. We lived in an environment with high interest rates and high inflation, and people were developing. So it's just mindset that you can't develop and you can't do anything because interest rates are high and inflation is high. Well, yeah, people did. There was a whole lifetime people did that.
Yeah, but I think what's different from now from like 83, 82, and again, I was really little then. I just think that so much money has injected itself into the economy via quantitative easing, printing of money, buying of securities, et cetera, that there's just so much capital out there right now. It hasn't a lot of real asset owners haven't been forced to capitulate yet.
Could be. I agree. Could be. I mean, that makes sense.
Mm.
But I still think again, there's always a way to make a buck, and you just got to find a way to make the buck. And again, I try not to. I have to obviously read. So I read the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and things. And you got to just be careful not to let it cloud what here is probably the right decision. And I go back to that people will make they will make calculated decisions based on what they know.
But I also find that when I read the Wall Street Journal and when I'm paying attention to real estate and specifically hospitality, when they write those articles every 2 months or 3 months, they're like 6 months behind, right?
Cool. Yeah, because we're all using stale data essentially, right? Because even the government stuff is a few weeks behind. Everything's somewhat stale. But again, data is data. So even if it's stale, a trend is a trend. And I always remind people about that. It's like, remember, yes, it may be a month behind, but you start seeing a trend, and that's regardless, then you can start hypothesizing if the trend will continue and what it means for you and what decisions you're going to make should this continues.
Yeah.
So don't let, even though they may be a little stale, don't let that be a deterrent to
Totally.
your decision. Yeah. And again, and I also laugh that no decision is a decision. People kind of say, if you decide not to do anything, well, you made a decision not to do anything, and that's a decision. And people don't think about that. They always say, well, I haven't decided yet. Well, no, you did. You just haven't acknowledged that your no decision is a decision.
Yeah. Okay. So demand is turning the corner.
It is.
If you were to put on your forecasting glasses and look at the next 2 years, let's just say, what do you see? If you were in Las Vegas, I'm not holding you to it, but if you were a gambling man, what do you see happening over the next 2 to 3 years?
I would have said it differs. So in January, I would have said more of the same. So, and that's what I truly believe. Right now, I'm on the fence that we could actually see something much better than we have. But to what extent, it's the degree that I don't know yet. So I do think our forecast, as it stands right now, assuming that the Middle East crisis that we're in doesn't spill over into our economy, I think my forecast or our forecast is maybe too low. But again, that's a big but. But there's, again, with this Middle East crisis stuff, I don't know. With the spillover, again, we've seen gas prices rise, which again, it's an inflationary thing. We could see other impacts, which could then impact pocketbooks, perceptions, whatever people.
Yeah.
But again, January, as of last week ago, I would have said last Friday, had we had this call last Friday, I would have been much more optimistic because I had just finished our podcast. I had just finished all the analysis, but didn't know what was going to happen on Saturday.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. I mean, we just don't know. But I still see people traveling. Again, as long as safety and security of travel is not impacted, then we probably have a good year.
Yeah.
But the moment safety and security of travel is compromised in any way, all bets are off. We saw people will be afraid to travel for a variety of reasons. So,
Yeah.
And then just one last thought I had. Again, assuming this crisis continues for a little bit, it could be, and this sounds bad, beneficial for domestic travel because people get worried about going overseas. And again, Americans have been going overseas in record numbers since COVID. If they stay home, that could help hotels here in locations. But again, that's a wait and see too. We don't know if people's perceptions of overseas travel will change.
Well, I think my takeaway from this conversation, Isaac, and I'd love to have you back on periodically to just have these conversations, or even I'll definitely put a link to your podcast, or maybe I could even, I've done this before where I take a podcast and drop it through my channels just so people can hear it. So we can talk about that later. But just to give people these snapshots, because everyone has their perceptions,
Right.
Everyone has their own thoughts and feelings and their life experience. And I don't want to discount that, but the data helps give a framework. That's why I love rules of thumb. Rules of thumb are not, I've always been an entrepreneur that is bootstrapping and figuring things out. And it's nice when I come across a rule of thumb because oftentimes I just don't have a framework for what's normal, right? So I appreciate this conversation. It helped me think differently about where we are and also think differently about some of my experiences in the past. So thank you.
And you're welcome. But I also think about, when I think about data, one of the things, key tenet in my mind is when I work with data is to triangulate things. So again, I do use lots of data, right? I am always in the data. And I try to bring different data sources. So I don't limit myself to STR data, even though it's my primary data source. But again, observation and talking to people, relationships really, really, really matter.
Mm.
It really is important to talk to people and understand their frame of mind or what they know, or even what they're thinking, because then it helps us as analysts. It's like, God, I didn't even think about that. Let me look into that. And so I do welcome for your listeners and viewers who are on this podcast to drop me a note at any time. You can find me on LinkedIn. There's Isaac Collazo at LinkedIn. You'll find me. STR. There's not many. There is no Isaac at STR other than me. And so I think.
Great.
But again, it's really important to not don't get fixated on a single number. I guess that's the thing. Never get fixated. Always be open to other numbers. And then the thing through is, wait a minute, this number said that, that number said that. How do I bridge that? And and we bridge lots of data here. That's what I do. Try to figure it out. It's like, okay, how does this all connect?
I love it. Well, we'll definitely put all of that contact information in the show notes. And again, thank you for helping me re-examine how I look at the world. And thank you, Adrian, for making me sit at the table with Isaac so that we had this happen. So it's so great to get to know you better. And everyone, that's why it's really important. You just heard him say it's all relationships. Get out there, talk to people, put your phone down, say hey.
Yeah, look up every once in a while.
Yeah. So thank you, Isaac. We'll have you back on. We'll drop all that stuff. We'll talk about how to get people listening to your podcast as well. But thank you to all of our listeners. Without you, I wouldn't have been at Alice. I wouldn't have had Adrian drag me to the table and sit with Isaac and be here to share all this information with you and prove some of my experiences incorrect, backed by data. So I appreciate that. And I'm always happy to be a guinea pig for all of you. If you think someone could benefit from this conversation and learn about the state of where we are, where we're going, and how to read the tea leaves, please pass it along to them. We grow a lot by word of mouth. We appreciate you. And don't forget, like, subscribe, and tune in next time.